Jerry Liu is an experienced athlete who flexes his math skills at MIT to help competitive swimmers optimize performance. Let's dive in.
Happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all about sports analytics and the work that we do with the MIT Sports Lab and some of my work with the US swimming team. So what is sports analytics? For those of you that don't know, it's all about using some form of technology, science, or math or engineering to figure out how to improve an athlete's performance, whether that comes from strategy during a race or during a game, whether that's equipment, whether that's nutrition, or that's training. All of these things could be improved, and how best to improve, that is what sports analytics is here for. A little about me. I'm currently a graduate student at MIT Sloan School of Management. I'm in my second year. I did my undergrad at University of Virginia. Before that, I was a competitive swimmer growing up. For those of you that are swimmers, my main event was the 100 and 200 breaststroke, as well as the 200 and 400 IM. And at MIT, most of my work with the MIT Sports Lab is in cycling, Australia cycling. And my work with swimming happens with the University of Virginia with my undergraduate college team. And you can see in the bottom right there, that's me and my advisor with our three Tokyo Olympic women who won silver medals. And on the bottom right, you see that's us with our Tokyo triathletes, Taylor Knibb and Summer Rappaport, who both won silver medals as well in Tokyo. Funny enough, all of them have silver medals. But yeah, I'm excited to show you guys first through some examples of how some technology has changed sports, how sports has evolved, and then we'll get into some of the work that I do specifically with swimming. So speed skating, for those of you that know or might know, it looks very similar to running. It looks very similar to track running. It's an ice rink with a 400-meter track, except not on the ground, you're on ice. The goal is to finish as fast as possible around an oval, and you can see here in the bottom left here, that's the Beijing Winter Olympic track in 2022, and you can see these lines at the bottom that tells you, that makes it easier to distinguish between who won and who lost. And races in speed skating are usually separated by time increments of 1/100th of a second. How has speed skating changed, right? Is there any technology that you can actually develop to make speed skating faster? So first of all, an understanding of physics and engineering for sure certainly helps. Because you're actually on ice rather than on the ground, it's slippery. You can't just run, right? When you're running, your hop comes from your toes, and you're generally not slipping when you're running. But on ice is very, very slippery. So for athletes on ice trying to essentially race around and get speed, they have to use the tip of the skate of that blade to get traction. In the 1990s, someone figured out a way to add a hinge and a spring to the front of a skate that allows the release of the back of the blade. And you can see here on the right where the blade stays in touch longer with the ground. So essentially, you're slipping less. It's like a running shoe with a foam at the bottom that releases and bounces you up every time you run. That's kind of similar to what Nike actually did with the running shoes with the carbon fiber plates. But what about sports that require a lot of equipment? For example, bike racing. In bike racing, the goal is to cross the finish line first, whatever that race is. And if you just look at the two pictures at the bottom, you can see that material engineering reshaping a sport. You can see on the left, it's 100 years ago, exactly 100 years ago in the Paris Olympics in 1924. That's the finishing of a bike race. And you can see these old bikes. These bikes of yesteryear is nothing compared to these modern bikes of carbon fiber, right? You can see on the right here, a triathlete has a time trial bike with his hands all the way together with back arched, very aerodynamically efficient. And you can see these big aero discs on the wheels, essentially to help you minimize your air resistance, right? This material engineering technology has come so far where in 1924, in a team pursuit event, where 4 men tried to race a 4 kilometer race, it takes them 5.5 minutes. But nowadays, individuals can do that in less than probably close to 4 minutes now. That comes from the equipment, the training, and everything analytics have done for the sport. Not only do materials help bike, you can see on the left here, this cyclist is in a wind tunnel trying to perfect his posture on how to best look like a really fast airplane, right? The goal of a cyclist is to move through air as fast as you can, just like an airplane. And on the right, you can see these helmets, teardrop helmets, because they kind of look like the teardrop if you rotate it properly. The goal of that is to look similar to the rear of an airplane. This is what moves fast in air, and they're incorporating that in sports. You can see these advancements in technology is very common across events that require sporting equipment, right? The ice skating, the cyclist, that's all very equipment dominated. But what about these human-driven sports, such as swimming, for example, right? A better understanding of how an athlete's body move can help. So in swimming, the objective is also very, very simple. Your goal is to get your hand on the wall first, nothing more. And swimming is very, very similar to running, but also very different, right? Think about marathon running on the right versus swimming on the left. It looks very similar to the 1924 Olympics, right? All you need is a swimsuit and water. That's all it takes to swim. And just like runners, all they need is shoes and a jersey. That's all they need to run. But what can you do about a sport like this? Newton, a really old guy who studied math and physics, came up a long time ago with laws that govern how things move, I guess, in the skies in terms of how planets orbit, but also how things move on Earth. Like if you throw a ball, where the ball is going to land. These tools can also be applied to help understand how swimmers move through water. What we can do is, or what we have done is, just like a wind tunnel where we study cyclists, we can study a swimmer's form through a simulated sort of water tunnel. After a 3D scan, you can actually run a computational fluid mechanics model and to see how a swimmer is moving their body through water. And you can see this is a swimmer kicking water. This is done by Johns Hopkins' fluid mechanics lab. What we are doing right now is also to figure out, using computer vision to feed in a video, or I'll show you again, to feed in a video to a program, and that tells you how an athlete is holding their body in the water. This is one of our sports labs colleagues' models that's originally designed for rowers. I just put in a different video, and it seems to work fine. But now to what I do for most of my time is actually athlete performance evaluation and optimization, where we get these accelerometers that measure forces on a swimmer's body in the water that they're applying to the water, and also the forces that water is exerting on the swimmer. And you can see with a device like this, you can measure streams of data on just how exactly they're moving through water. And that data looks something like this. The streams of data like this makes no sense if you don't know what you're looking for, but to a very trained eye, you can actually see every single little peak, every single detail represents something that corresponds to what a swimmer is doing. And all of these, for every swimmer, there's something to get better at doing. So most of what I do is actually to design experiments for our athletes. And you can see there, that's me with Alex Walsh, one of our Olympians, to figure out how should they pace themselves throughout a race? What should their tempo or frequency of their kicks, their stroke speed? How big should their kicks be? How do they hold their head? How do they hold their body? And how do they pull water? All of that goes into swimming analytics that I do. But yeah, next up we have the US Olympic trials where most of our athletes will be going to, and they will compete for a chance to represent Team USA at the Paris Olympic Games. Yeah.
Wow, that is super, super cool, Jerry. Let's dive into this Q&A. We already have some fantastic questions in the chat. And the first few that came in were actually about your athletic career. And they're wondering, first of all, do you still swim?
I do swim. I'm gonna swim right after this, right after our meeting. But I mostly do it for recreationally now, and mainly just to stay fit and stay healthy. And I enjoy being in the water, so it's fun. I still swim. Yeah, I like it.
That's excellent. And now a follow-up question to that from a student named Omar. And Omar is wondering, when you were swimming, did you break any records yourself that you can remember?
I did break our school's 100-yard breaststroke record. I think that was a 59.4 in yards, so roughly translates to a 107, 106 in long course meter time, which is what standard internationally. So I was okay. Can't say I was really good. I was good enough to know that I wasn't that good.
Well, I can tell you with certainty that you are miles ahead of me. Now, the follow-up question to that is, in addition to swimming, do you play any other sports? Were you interested in sports in general when you were younger?
Oh, I played a lot of sports growing up. I trained a lot in tennis between the ages of 10 and 8 to 10-ish. I played badminton, I played basketball a little bit back when I was taller than most of my peers. Stopped doing that, moved into swimming because everyone else got really tall. So stopped doing that. I did enjoy a bike ride every now and then, but that's about it.
Got it. And now folks are wondering if we could shift over into a few questions about the technologies and using this sports analytics approach. And we have a student who's wondering, have you ever made any technologies to assist in the sports that athletes can use themselves?
I have to say, I don't build technology. I do mostly data analysis for reasons that I would like it, for questions I like answers to. So most of the technology is available, and technology advancement is so fast where I don't have the expertise to build one. But there's so much of this technology is out there that you can utilize to figure out ways to help you improve. For example, the accelerometers, that goes into every single device likely that you're wearing, in your phone, in your watch, that likely has an accelerometer in it, right? In these in these heart rate sensors that you see, a lot of sensors for athletes that are wearing these days, all of them have heart rate sensors. They all come, most of them come from Polar, some comes from, it's a combination of different technologies where they build programs to figure out how to understand the data that is produced. Because just having the data is not enough. You need to know what that tells you. And so most companies are more focused on figuring out how to use what the device tells you rather than how to build the device. And that's mainly our goal, which is to help athletes get better. We don't really care if it's this brand or that brand. We just need something that works.
Got it. And since you mentioned accelerometers, I'm going to jump now to a question from a student named Suchit. And Suchit's wondering, does using an accelerometer in water, does it behave differently versus if you have it on a runner? Do they behave differently depending on whether they're exposed to air or water?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. That for sure does, because if you think about a runner, the biggest obstacle a runner has to overcome is gravity. Every time you hop, the earth is pulling you down. But when you're running, you do not have, most people don't have enough speed where wind resistance is of a major concern. The main concern is, how do I move and direct my energy to get myself forward? But in swimming, it is actually the opposite. In the water, human bodies are near neutral in terms of buoyancy, meaning that when you're in the water, you don't float up and you don't sink down. Water just naturally floats you up. So you don't truly feel gravity. You're just not sinking down every single time you come up. So what that means is the major problem that you have to overcome is water resistance, because water is significantly denser than air. So it's all about resistance, and these accelerometers will show. So when you have an accelerometer on a runner, you can see that gravity is always pulling you down. But when you see it in the water, right, in the one of the up-down direction, you can see that, right? There's always a force floating you up. So that is what's really unique about. These things are different, but they're very, very similar.
Got it. That's great. And digging into the science even more, we have a fantastic question for a Nord Anglia student. And they're wondering, when you get this data, how do you translate that into a graph and then interpret what athletes could change to improve their own performances?
That, for the most part, what we do is we construct a battery of tests for an athlete to experiment with different execution of the same race to see how each of them compare against each other. So it's all about getting the data, just plotting them with a program, with a computer program of your choice, I guess. You just need to see what that line looks like, what that trend line looks like, and how this trend line compares to that trend line to see which one of these executions this athlete is more comfortable with, but also they're just better at doing. May that be mechanically better, or just they just feel better doing that and they want to keep doing that. So it's ultimately it comes down to the person. It's true, really hard to say what exactly someone should do and someone shouldn't do.
Got it. And that leads me, and I'm wondering this myself. Could you walk us through a day in the life of Jerry? What are you doing on a given day? Are you with athletes, at the pool, for example, showing them the data like you did in that really cool photo? What does a day seem like to you?
So my day is practically a normal day. I usually get my swim in early, but these sessions with athletes don't happen as often as you might think they do. Usually, I'd say once every 2, 3 months per athlete is more than enough, because first of all, studying these streams of acceleration takes a lot of time. So right, they're very constrained on time. But second of all, for these athletes, every single time you come up with something that they can improve on, they actually need time to actually work on it and actually make that muscle memory rather than something they have to think about doing in order for it to truly be useful. Because right, in the biggest moments, right, when it's right for all the marbles, you can't be thinking about what you're doing. You kind of have to just get in and do it, knowing that you know how to do it. And so for these athletes, it's all about after we figure out something, they need to figure out a way to internally truly learn it and just make that happen. So I'd say every 2 to 3 months, you check on these athletes over a session with them, say maybe a 20-minute session per athlete. That should be more than.
So it sounds like there's a tremendous amount of work that goes in to meeting with that athlete every time. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's usually 20 minutes with the athlete and usually takes about 5, 10 hours per person or on the team, I guess. But yeah.
Wow, goodness. And we have a follow-up question to that from Madden in Boston. And Madden's wondering, once you have that data, could you talk us through how do you communicate it to the athlete in that, 10 minutes or so? How do you communicate it so that, they can actually act on it and create meaningful change in their technique?
So that I'm less confident about, because that generally I'd argue that really good coaches will figure out how to actually best internalize an athlete and build a very specific, say, mechanics or strategy into a swimmer's race execution. I'm not a coach. I've never truly coached swimmers, so that I'm not sure I know how to answer that. But what we can provide the coach is, if they want an answer to a question, right? Is this better than that? I can confidently tell them, for this person right now, they're better at doing this than doing that. So consider switching to that.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like it's a whole team effort there. The coach plays a role, the athlete plays a role, and you and other researchers play a huge role. So yeah, it really does take a team to win. And now we have a question about using this technology in general. Do you know, when did folks start doing this kind of sports analytics in the first place? And how do you think this will affect the future of, perhaps swimming or even all sports?
Well, for most sports, the data-driven approach has already happened. If you think about the baseball, Moneyball happened in the 1980s, and moving into this day and age, you know for sure that these soccer teams, these basketball teams, they all have large analytics groups trying to figure out how to use data to construct potentially offensive strategy, defensive strategy, how to evaluate athletes before they recruit them. How do you optimize your draft? All of that has already happened, and a lot of research is being done into that. But those are mainly for the professional sports, as in professional meaning not Olympic sport, or less Olympic sports, more professional sports. But on the Olympic sports side, a lot has also been done. For example, right, in cycling, a lot has been done with figuring out how does an athlete move their body through air better, meaning how well do they hold their form, right? Protein bars or energy gels during a race, that never happened, right? In the early 1900s, before a marathon, they used to administer, I guess this could be wrong, but word on the street is they were administered raw eggs and brandy. So you can see how much this has, just the understanding of nutrition, everything has helped an athlete, how the understanding of human body and how athletes think, how they work, and everything has already happened, and it'll just continue to happen.
Wow, that is bonkers to think of. Now, you mentioned something earlier on in your answer. You mentioned something called Moneyball. For those of us that don't know, can you just briefly tell us what that is?
Moneyball. So in the United States, there's this team called the Oakland A's, and they have a very short budget, and their goal is to figure out how to be really, really good with very, very little money. So they essentially figured out a way to most efficiently pick players to construct a winning team. That's practically a long story short.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's really fascinating that, you're describing with the Moneyball example, advances in baseball to thinking about swimming and other sports and bicycling. So this really is affecting everything, and will continue to affect it. And we have a follow-up question from a student who's wondering, do you think that Michael Phelps cares about the sports analytics when he's swimming or before he was retired?
I can't really speak for Michael Phelps, but well, he does sponsor a couple of sports device companies, but I say he for sure did in one way or another, meaning a lot of what we do is translating what you see into something that's actionable. And for an athlete the caliber of Michael Phelps, he internally knows how to translate these things. If he looks at something and see, whoa, this guy's doing something better than I am, I should probably try that. Right? That's essentially what we're doing. It's just we have a relatively more efficient way of trying things than back in the days where you have to see someone do it in order to try, or unless you have to come up with your own thing. But Michael Phelps is the greatest athlete of all, like in swimming history. It's hard to say that he didn't care. He probably wants every opportunity to be the best that he can be.
Got it. Yeah, I bet that's true of a lot of athletes competing at that level at this point, given how important it is to the game. Now we have a follow-up question from a student who's wondering, Jerry, if you could talk us through, you were an athlete yourself, you were a swimmer, you were a competitive swimmer. What made you realize that you wanted to help other athletes? What got you into this? When did you start thinking about data and the way that you use it now?
I guess that's interesting because, right, growing up, I trained practically semi-professionally for a decent amount of years throughout middle school, high school. My class or my teammates, they have Olympic dreams. They all want to be the best that they can be, and they're more naturally gifted, some more naturally gifted, some just arguably works even harder than I do. And they all want to be the best that they can be, and what they can be is breaking world records and going to the Olympics. And so at that point, it was mainly, hey, I know how to analyze data. Maybe I can figure out a way to help these athletes get better, right? These athletes are my classmates or my teammates. They're my, right, even students when I TA'd them. It's I would do anything that I can do to potentially help them make that happen. And so that's generally how this thing went about. And my teammate growing up, her name is Phoebe Bacon. She actually made the Olympic team and went to Tokyo. She ended up 5th in the 200-meter backstroke, but she became a US Olympian.
Got it. And then along the way, when you were in high school and college, did you have to study physics and math? I know a couple students in the chat are curious. What did you have to study to be able to kind of interpret this data and think about, how do we get this to an athlete?
I think an understanding of physics, math for sure helps. I'd say an understanding of science in general helps everything. Even chemistry, right? Water, right? How does water, right? Just knowing water will help, right? Understanding how the differences between swimming in river water and open water is very different from analyzing a swimmer that's swimming in pool water, because there's potential flow, there's a lot of turbulence, all kinds of things, and understanding of physics, the general idea of physics and of science, of math, all of that will help you develop an understanding of how the world works, as in how objects move and how the laws of nature work.
Got it. Nope, that makes sense. Science explains the world for sure. Now we have a question from a student tuning in named Hashim, and Hashim's wondering, when you were an athlete and perhaps even now, how do you handle high pressure situations when you're competing? Do you have any advice? I know that we have a lot of athletes on the call today, so I think they're all very curious. How did you manage it, Jerry?
I say the easiest way to do it is to just do it a lot, where it becomes pretty common. But I generally like to think that if you're not feeling a little nervous then before a big race, then being nervous is not bad. Being scared is a little bad. So being nervous just means you care and you want to just do what you can and do the best that you can. And so what my coach used to do with us is visualization techniques. We had some call it what is it called? The psychologists call it focus attention regulation training, but most people I think call that just meditating. But it's a combination of just visualizing yourself in the water before you actually swim a race. So one of the things that before a race I do is I actually hold a stopwatch when I'm right before bed, and I start, right? I just imagine the starter saying, take your mark and go, and you start the watch, and then you visualize yourself over 100 or whatever race you want to visualize yourself in. And then if you stop the watch, and then when you wake up, you see what time you went. That is surprisingly similar to the time I actually go to the ball. But
That is a really neat trick and so cool. But I think it makes sense that there is such a huge component that's, it's not just a physical preparation. It is also the mental and how you think about each race and how you're able to use that information to improve and to maximize your own performance. We have, I don't think I can even count. We have so many fantastic questions in the chat, but I can say at least 5 of them are from students wondering, what's your favorite swimming stroke?
I'd argue breaststroke. I do like breaststroke. So, and I swam breaststroke for a long time growing up. That has been my main event since I've actually had all of the strokes as my main event other than freestyle. But I think at some point I realized when everyone got really tall, really big, then breaststroke was the easiest stroke. When I say easiest, I mean technique matters more than just pure power. So that's what
Got it. And
I do
now,
like breaststroke.
yeah, that's really neat. I remember that's one of the first strokes I learned when I was swimming as a kid. That's totally fantastic. We have a question now from Talia, who I suspect might be a swimmer, but she's wondering, are there any specific tips that you might be able to share with the student athletes on how to think about water resistance and ways that you can move to decrease your resistance?
That likely depends on who you are and how you swim, your strength and weaknesses. But the main thing that we're noticing, at least amongst our elite athletes, is that we can use potentially more underwater swimming than overwater swimming, as much as the regulations allow. Staying underwater for longer does help if you have the kicks, the legs to back that up. I'd say that's one of the most important things that has been underutilized back in the days, but that if using underwaters efficiently for sure will help you get faster, or learning how to do that efficiently.
Got it. Okay. And as a follow-up to that, a few students are wondering, when did you start swimming originally? When did it all begin?
I started swimming when I was 5, but that was swim school until like 8. When you're young, it's my parents' philosophy was that it's good to try a couple of sports, and also the cross training does help with, right? For example, tennis, it helps your body positioning, it helps your proprioception, meaning that knowing where all your limbs are, where your leg is, where your hands are, and seeing the ball and predicting where the ball is, where you need to hit the ball, how you need to hit the ball to get it to go where you want to go. All of those things that I've done growing up, and that for sure has helped my swimming. As I gotten older, the training got tougher throughout the years.
Fair. So it's really been a lifelong thing for
Yeah,
you. I mean, since the age of 5, you're thinking about swimming in every single way. That is super neat, and that shows, putting in that hard work over a long period of time and having that commitment. Now we have a student who's, I think, thinking ahead, and they're wondering, do you think that in the future people could use artificial intelligence or 3D simulations to help make the types of assessments that you kind of showed us today?
for sure they could. Even today, a lot of the devices that are out there are using these machine learning algorithms to figure out what to present on a dashboard for an athlete that's easy to read, rather than looking at data streams that we currently do by hand. Because, right, first of all, we can't, right, for me, I can't really make any mistakes. I have to know exactly what's happening for every athlete. Their their force profiles, how they move through water, I have to know all of that. But I'm sure in the future that some robot could probably do it better than humans can, and they'll catch things that we don't catch. But generally speaking, there's also this human aspect in sport where it's ultimately all comes down to the athlete and figuring out how you tell an athlete stuff. And generally, I don't have to do that. Usually, our talented coaching staff do that, and they figure out how to do that. But that is one of the main things. Right? Artificial intelligence, for sure. Right? If you look at every sensor device, two of the biggest things, at least in the States, are the United States, you see are Whoop and Aura rings. These things all have machine learning toolkits in there to learn from your habits, learn from how you conduct your daily life, to give you suggestions on potentially how to be more active or how to be a better athlete. So it is out there and it's already being applied, but we just haven't seen something that just fundamentally changes how you approach the sport just as of yet, I'd argue.
Got it. Okay. And I wonder now if I could ask you, I think a few students are wondering, perhaps they're swimming themselves and are looking to improve. What goes through your mind during a race? What are you thinking about when you're actually in the water?
That's interesting. Generally, I don't really think about anything at all. It's mainly in a race, you're there to race. You're there to race because when you're on the blocks, you sort of kind of have to know that you've done everything that you can possibly do to get to this point. So you just need to get in and do it. And so at that point, you just get in and you do it, and you see what happens. And you see swimmers next to you, you race them. That's right. You're there to race them. Racing them helps you be faster and helps them get faster too. Right? That's why the fastest times usually happen in races rather than in, I guess, what you will call time trials, where you just go yourself. Right? The fastest times happen when you're racing someone else. That gives you a little bit more motivation, a little more adrenaline, a little more everything.
Got it. And to follow up on that, we have a question from Dahlia, and Dahlia is wondering, is thinking about your tempo and your pace, or is at least being aware of them, important while you're swimming, or is that something that you tend to think about when you're out of the pool?
That you generally that most of the thinking should be done before the race. During the race, you're just racing. If you're right, if during the race or right before the race, your plan, you're like, oh, my plan is to do this, do this, do that, and do that. And if you miss one of these things, you're kind of screwed, right? No, I think just trusting yourself that you have the in race solution in mind, right? If I go a little too deep on the start, how do I recover and get back to the race, but the race at hand? Like that is one of the most important things that you throughout racing, growing up racing, you'll probably learn how to do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that makes sense. And, we have a lot of great questions in the chat from students who, have maybe some specific questions about their own techniques or how they can improve. And I'm wondering if you might be able to share with us, are there any resources that you referred to or that helped you a lot now as you're working with these athletes, or when you were, competitively swimming yourself, that helped you improve yourself as a swimmer in your performance? Any resources you could share for these kids?
I say your first resource, number one resource is your coach. Use your coach well. Your coach is there to help you get better. So for most people, I'd argue use your coach a little bit more, meaning ask your coach questions. How does that look? Does that look better than the one I did before? Ask your coach to film you during a practice, because looking at what you're doing and potentially your friend in the lane next to you, they just went faster than you. You usually beat him, they just somehow went faster than you, right? Figuring out, is there something that I'm doing differently or I could be doing differently, for sure helps. And then I'd say watching film of really great athletes helps, but to an extent, because right, you're not right, you're not built like Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps is not the end all be all way to swim, because if you try swimming like Michael Phelps, that will probably make you slower, because right, your lats, right, your training is not the same and your aerobic capacity is not the same. You can't truly swim like Michael Phelps. You can only swim the best way that you can. So it's more about figuring out how to do that than how to imitate the best athletes.
Got it. And we have a few follow-up questions to something we discussed earlier in the Q&A about anxiety and, being scared. And students are wondering, I think they've gotten the message, you don't want to be scared, and maybe some anxiety is a good thing, but how did you calm yourself, or do you have any tips to calm your nerves if you are feeling that anxiety? I think a lot of students mentioned they'd love to feel calm and focused right before a race. How did you manage to pull that off, or what do you tell athletes when you get to talk to them today?
Well, I'd argue that usually for me, when I raced, it's very similar people that I've raced before. So these people are kind of like my friends. There's some trash talk going on for sure, but yeah, it involves a lot of slapping yourself really hard, so your half of your body is red, and then yeah, before you dive in to the pool, I guess, and let your swimming do the talking. But
Okay.
it's there's truly not much you can do. It's more about just getting yourself ready to race, and right, you see your friends down the pool next to you over there cheering for you. It becomes a fun experience.
Got it. And just for, if any of us on the call today have tuned in and we're not swimmers, why are you slapping yourself before your race? I think I've seen this on television before too. What's
Oh,
going
you sure? Yeah, you for sure have. Usually the slapping yourself is mainly, it's one of the ways that you can be active when you're waiting for the heat in front of you to finish, or if you're in a ready room. You should not just sit there and be very, very still. Generally speaking, it is a bad idea. Staying active, just being inactive, a little bit of hopping, a couple of jumping jacks doesn't hurt you, mainly just because it keeps your blood flowing and keeps your heart rate on a working basis rather than fully at rest, which is probably not good. But
Okay. Got it. That makes a lot more sense, because I always got a little confused seeing that and a little worried, I'll have to admit, but that makes a ton of sense. So Jerry, we have so many open questions still in the chat, but not enough time to go through every single one of them. I wonder if we can leave you with a closing question that got repeated a few times. I think students are curious, who is your favorite swimmer and why?
I don't really have a favorite swimmer, but most of the swimmers, my teammates, I guess, I always cheer for all of my teammates and all of my swimmers. It's hard to say that who my favorite swimmer is, but I say my favorites have to be the athletes that I generally work with and my teammates that are still in the sport and wanting to be the best that they can be.
That's a fantastic answer. And as we end the Q&A, I think Jerry and I can agree on this. We hope that all the student athletes, we wish them all the best of luck on their performances as after this call. And I hope that we'll all see these fantastic students again for our upcoming abstracts. We have a wonderful season ahead of us. And lastly, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today for asking fantastic questions. Thanks to the athletes who joined. That was really fun. Big thanks to the MIT Nord Anglia Education Collaboration for making this series possible and for giving us the opportunity to meet with Jerry. And lastly, I can't thank you enough, Jerry. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight and advice and history with us today. This was totally amazing. And I think I'm going to watch all of the coming swimming that I see in such a different light now, thinking of all the amazing work that goes into it.
Absolutely happy to be here and happy you got the opportunity to talk to them.
Fantastic. Okay, goodbye, everyone. See you next time.